So, Nicole, thank you just so much for joining us tonight. And I know that this topic is something that is extremely close to your heart. And I really do appreciate you just making the time to be with us tonight. So, maybe, Nicole, just to start off, tell us a little bit about yourself and where your heart for racial reconciliation started.
Thanks, Yaku. Such a privilege for me to be here, and I really, really am grateful. Sure, my journey with reconciliation started as I think it's been a long one, but really the pinpoint for me was probably the fact that I was the first school year, grade 1 year, with different race groups in my year. It was the slow end of apartheid, and our school, which was a white school, very quickly became a multicultural school with I think a third coloured, a third black, and a third white. And within that, there were obviously very interesting tensions that even as a young girl, I was definitely aware of. And one of the first very prominent things was that a lot of our white friends and white people in this school started pulling out because it was transforming too quickly for their comfort, I guess. And my parents made a decision and very clearly told my sister and I that they weren't going to remove us from the school because this was our country and this was a realistic picture of our country. And that really made an impact on me. But then fast forward, as a teenager, you sort of just go through life blissfully unaware. And in grade 11, we had two prominent teachers in our high school that really poured into reconciliation in our school. And they took us on a camp, a 4-day camp. And during that camp, we were made aware of stereotypes, prejudices, and all of that was led to a point of we were 24 grade 11 kids that were facilitated in the process of reconciliation and really hearing one another's stories. So it was a black girl that I sat next to in maths every day for like past 4 years. And when I really heard her story about what her parents went through, what her parents had to sacrifice for her to be in school, where my family didn't, then the penny started dropping about our system that we're in and the fact that we're out of apartheid and we're in our rainbow nation, which was very much the tune of that time, didn't necessarily mean that everything was okay. And that's really when it started hitting home. And I think the process of really listening to people's stories, like that value sunk, because I could know Lebo next to me and know her well and be in class with her every day. But until I really listen to her story and understand the sacrifices of her parents, but also the daily, just her day looking different to mine and very real struggles, my relationship with her changed.
Thank you, Nicole. I think it's amazing how the skill of listening can really have such a deep impact just in our own lives. Now, last week we had a conversation with Andrew, and he touched on the topic of white privilege. And I don't know maybe how with your relationship with your school friends, how that has helped you to gain a better understanding of what white privilege is.
Mm. Sure, there were numerous stories and I think realities that really hit home for me. But one of them specifically also happened on our rainbow camp, and we were just talking about how we grew up. And one of the boys in the group, he actually lost control of his emotions and he just broke down. And the facilitator sort of helped him tell his story. And basically, he just said like he is only able to attend this school because his mum has been a domestic worker for her entire life, and he hardly sees her. She has to work long hours, and she has really given up her whole life for him to be at the school. And he actually had tears, but he had real anger. I remember that distinctly. And I think it hit for a lot of us, it hit home that where we just took being at school for granted, something that, this good government school that we can go to, for him, it was massive sacrifice that led up and was still having to happen. His mom was still a domestic worker. He didn't have the same clothing we did. And we knew that, like his background was not as affluent as ours. And you look down at that as a teenager. You sort of pull yourself out of that group because he's not like us. And when we heard his story and we heard his anger, it really, I think, as a group, it affected us. But there were many stories. I mean, a lot of kids at our school that just didn't have the same start as us. And yeah, the reality of that white systemic privilege that we have was real in our school.
That's so good, and I think it's almost like if we choose not to engage with this topic of white privilege, it keeps us comfortable. That if I choose not to partake or I choose not to ask out, then I can remain blind or ignorant to the conversation, and that keeps me comfortable. But I think our relationship with God, our relationship with Jesus, it forces us to step into this space, and we cannot go through life with blinders on. So I think it's such a good thing that we get to navigate through as believers.
I think that's something I'm still being challenged with. There are things that I have and that I've inherited that were taken from a race group, from my grandparents' time and pre that. And that's not something I did, but it's something I still benefit from. And that realization is tough initially because you just feel, it's not my responsibility. I didn't do anything. Except if you take a step back and you realize neither did my Black friend. They did nothing to deserve what they have either. And the only thing is that we have histories that look very different. And I think that is the journey that we're on as South Africans, is of really getting real with our history and understanding how that impacts us today.
Now, obviously, a big part of your journey, Nicole, was when you chose to join the church plant in the inner city of Pretoria. And maybe just share with us how that shaped your heart and your mind.
Yeah, I think when a group of us in 2010 started feeling the call to the inner city, it actually started with Prayer Friday, which I know Yaku and there might be a few other people can remember that. And every Friday we met at the union buildings on the stairs, and there were tensions in our country that started it off, and we just carried on meeting and praying. And within that group, there were a few of us that were just feeling moved towards inner city, because it is just this like mixed bowl of different people from all over Africa, and it's just incredibly diverse. And we just felt a strong calling to just trust God for a church there. And then there were, I think it was Nelan and a few others that found a flat in the city, and they basically, said, let's start it with the idea of moving in there. And I think that was the core of starting the church, was that we realized we wanted to be living in the city. We wanted our neighbors to be the people that we reach out to, and actually to just start relating to what it means to be living in the city. And initially it felt like this big, just mysterious place, and it became home. It became a place where we made friends and ended up discipling a lot of the people that we met in McDonald's, in Essex Street. When we were walking to the public pool, there are a lot of stories of just living, doing life there that led to meeting the people that lived there. And that really did lead to a multicultural church. So that was a massive privilege. But I think within that journey, there was so much we didn't know. And obviously a lot of mindsets that had to be broken down. And there were even, break-ins and things where we really were confronted with, okay, this is our country. It is unjust. There are a lot of needs, and we're being broken into, but so are our neighbors. And we're all in this together. So there was a lot of breaking down of our mentalities and of comfort, a lot of comfort that was taken away. But it was really an incredible time. And God really, He really used that church plant, I think, to establish a lot in all of us.
And so obviously, in this journey of being part of the church plant, you were challenged a lot in your own culture as a white person, and what that looks like and what it means for you as a white person stepping into a much more diverse, multicultural setting. So maybe just share a little bit on that experience.
I mean, it's hard for me to remember what my mindset was before inner city, because it changed so drastically, and it's obviously become a part of me because it was such a poignant time. But I do remember, initially, the idea of going to inviting everyone to cell group, I just assumed that they'd be able to pitch up. And I didn't realize until I got to know them what sacrifices were made from across the city to get to where I was having my Connect group. And that eventually led to me realizing, okay, I'm going to make this, doable, I'm going to offer to pick some of the girls up, because it's just actually quite dangerous to have a Connect group at night, after everyone's been working. And then to get to me in Sunnyside, there's just danger involved in getting to me. So it involved me getting to the car, or we actually in the end ended up meeting at McDonald's, and that was the best. Our Connect groups were the best during those McDonald's times. But then we also, as we formed a friendship, I started inviting more of them to our house, and we'd have meals together and have coffees together. And I think that's also where I really began to learn that around those meals, like there was a lot of me making my meals and doing, what I do, but there was a lot of them not being able to share how they would like to do a meal. And I only later learned that I was supposed to invite myself to their home to come have a meal with them, and they were unsure if I actually would do that. So I think also in hindsight, like, I definitely could have done that more. That's one of the things that in the past few months I've had some good conversations with some of the girls in my Connect group, and just been honest and real about it, and said that was one of my white discomforts that it was difficult for me to shake, and I regret that. I wish we had done more meals at their homes. But yeah, I think one has to have lots of grace on oneself in the process, because you slowly peel your assumptions and your stereotypes and your fears away, and that's okay. And I think the biggest lesson was to just slow down. We have such a fast pace in our culture, and I'm just talking a broadly West culture, not necessarily white, but just in the culture we all find ourselves in. We can be so rushed from one meeting to the next. But the real discipleship relationships happen when we slow down time and we did life together. And I think that was the key of living in the city, because going to church, we could then walk home together, and it would fold into a lunch, and then it would extend into coffee. But, that was really doing life together. And that was a challenge to, I think, to really protect that, to really just not get stuck in a rut of needing to move into all the different phases of discipleship and doing things, but to really just get to know one another and get to know a different culture, and let them get to know me, and make it genuine.
That's so good, Nicole. And I think we can acknowledge that these conversations can seem very, very intimidating. And I think just specifically on the back of so much tension in our own nation, this conversation can seem daunting. We can be almost too afraid to step into it. But I love how there's this grace of God available for us to have this conversation. And it's almost like we get to step into this conversation with God, as this is His heart. That God has a heart for racial reconciliation. And when we choose to step into that space with Him, it's not that intimidating, and it's not that complicated, and it's not that difficult, because there's a grace available. And I love that. And what I appreciate with that is that it gives us room to be honest. That grace makes room for us to be honest, to be transparent, to be real, to be vulnerable. And even to make mistakes, like this conversation, even our conversation here, it doesn't need to be perfect. And I don't think we need to pretend that it has to be perfect, because there's grace. And grace allows for imperfections. And even if I say something as a white person and Flomelo takes offense, because there's grace, the conversation doesn't stop. He has the liberty to say, hey, let me correct you. You don't see something the way I see it. And I think that is what God is making available. And I really do believe that there is this grace available for us as a nation to step into this if we're willing.
I have to add on that, Jaco. I can't agree with you more. And I've honestly seen that in my own life, but also within the relationships, specifically with one of the friends that I met in inner city. And I actually, after she made a post about just how she's been stirred during Black Lives Matter, there was something that she said that triggered in me. It was initially just a conviction that I had actually, although we had and we still have a very good friendship, there was definitely me pulling her into my life during that season more than me, stopping my thing and reaching out and actually just meeting her in her life. I had this idea that I'm pulling her into church family, into a better life, which I was, but also out of a bit of, needing a car, and I'm bringing her into a better life. And that's true, and it was to an extent true, but I missed a golden opportunity to just stop what I thought I was doing and meet her in her space. And I phoned her a month ago and I just said, I'm really sorry that I did not stop and just come to your home more, and that I was so intent on pulling you into this, better space, that I missed an opportunity to just be with you in yours. And she was so moved by it, and she just affirmed me, and she knew my intentions, but it meant a lot to her that I apologized, because it means I'm acknowledging who she is, the culture that she's from, the history that she has, that yes, didn't have as much materially as me, but is just as rich and just as worthy. And there was a massive healing that happened in just that hour-long conversation of me repenting of something that I was completely oblivious to then. And my intentions were also very pure then. But I can now, with distance and also with just what God's done in my heart, acknowledge that there was actually an arrogance in my action without me even knowing it. And I am so glad that I phoned her to say sorry, because I don't think we even realize the healing that that'll mean for both of us going forward. Hopefully there's a more of a humility in me to just reach out differently to people going ahead, and for her also to just have more grace. So yeah, I think there's really an incredible opportunity at the moment for us to just not be afraid and reach out to one another and allow God to do the talking through this time.
Wow, this is challenging. And I think I'm also even challenged in my own life, just as how often I view my way of doing something as the right way. Not even just with the race conversation in my home with my wife. My way is the right way. But now in this conversation, I view my cultural way of doing things as the right way. But I think the problem is that I don't see my way of doing it as the white way. I see it as the right way. So I'm oblivious to that. And when I step into a space and my heart might be sincere to want to try and help someone, my goal is to make them more like me because my way is right. But I miss out on certain cultural diversities and expressions and values in cultures that look different. And it's almost like trying, almost unintentionally, pulling people towards a uniform culture, and that would fall short of God's heart for diversity. So for instance, we had a conversation this one week with a guy from Botswana, and he said, in the white culture, for us, when we speak to someone, especially someone who's a leader in your midst, it's respectful and honoring to look them in the eyes. And for them, in their culture, it's dishonoring if you look someone in the eye. But then if he was to step into a white leadership environment, he would be looked down upon because he's not showing honor or respect. And those are the type of things we miss when we're not willing to step into the conversation and to really engage and ask questions, listen, and learn. Nicole, last thing, maybe just for you, this journey has obviously deposited so many treasures in your heart, so many good things that God has revealed to you and things that God has built into your life that you'd never want to change. Maybe just share with us a couple of those things that has really been just such a blessing into your life.
Gosh, it's just, if it comes to my faith, I can't imagine it being I can't imagine living my faith out in any other way. The fact that God calls us to a fellowship and a family that is initially perhaps uncomfortable, but if you push through, is so incredibly beautiful, and is not something that actually you can't explain it in worldly terms. Like, it doesn't quite make sense that a group of such different people can cohabit and worship together and do community together. And for me, often that's been the crux of the miracle of Christ's story, is that he does call a group of vagabonds and, completely different people, together, and we're supposed to do this thing of gospel and of spreading the news and community together. And that's incredibly powerful. Like, the verse that comes to mind is Philippians 2 verse 1 to 11. It's a large chunk, but it is so beautiful in helping us understand how because Jesus came to earth, and he as God came to dwell with us as humans, and he reconciled us to him. That's the example we have of why we can put down our arrogance and put down our strong mindsets of how culture should function, how things should happen, and why we need to keep pursuing to be one of mind. In Philippians 2, they speak of being united in your mindset, and because of what Christ has done, and put aside your differences and love one another purely. It's not verbatim what it says, but that is essentially what it's saying. And for me, what a powerful picture to be pulled into, that we can reflect God's heart as the church, that we have this incredible, exciting opportunity right now where the world is tense, where Black Lives Matter is a movement, and within our own country, the tensions of race, and we're still dealing with apartheid in so many ways, the history of that, but where God can actually take that hurt and take those ashes and make something so beautiful and so strong, that we can, as a community, allow for our differences and allow for the discomfort, but be unified through Christ, is what an incredible space to be in. So yeah, I think in my own journey, I've worked through, and I'm continually working through my just myself and my ego, but because of Christ and because of the continuous space of letting go of myself and allowing more of him in, one is able to be part of the story of reconciliation. So yeah, that's how it's affected me and still is affecting me.
Thank you, Nicole. I really love just hearing your heart behind the way you share, and really see that this is something that the gospel has worked in your life.